Welcome to Gospel Lil Prep. I am Avery.
And it is the Riversend that is on show for the start of the opening ceremony of the Games of the 33rd.
The Paris Olympics have come to an end. I finally got a chance to watch the controversial opening ceremony online. As a Christian from China, my journey of faith has been deeply influenced by France. I love Pascal. Even though I have little interest in the Olympics, I had an uneasy anticipation for the Paris opening ceremony. And as expected, it turned out to be a celebration for the left, pushing the limits of tolerance for conservatives. Now that the online debates and criticisms surrounding this ceremony have quieted down, maybe we can look back and ask, beyond the anti-Christian accusations, what deeper reflections does France offer us Christians through this event? And what did this world-shocking ceremony bring to France in terms of faith? Let's delve into the Christian faith embedded in these cultural symbols. Consider an alternative perspective on the French Revolution, and explore how French aesthetics have been ideologically driven. I've recently moved to Barcelona from China. It was just a month ago that Barcelona was in the midst of its Pride Month celebrations, which felt overwhelming to me as a newcomer from East Asia. But as I explored the city more thoroughly, it began to reveal the details shaped by its Christian heritage. The skyline here is not a jungle of tall buildings. The most prominent structure is a church, and the highest point is crowned with a statue of Christ. Many streets are named after Christian saints, with Gothic churches scattered throughout. So the whole city feels like it's wrapped in the gospel. Although Spain was seen as the last symbol of the medieval past, as a Protestant who grew up in a non-Christian culture, I can't help but feel a sense of envy. Back in 1163, the construction of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris kicked off a craze for building Gothic cathedrals. A large number of Gothic churches were built in Europe. People used all their imagination and skills to make these churches taller and more awe-inspiring. The desire to bring people into the presence of God's glory reached the peak. At the same time, with the rise of universities, the combination of human reason and faith led to a profound love for truth. The European Christians who sought knowledge through faith, driven by their belief in the Creator and their responsibility to glorify God, initiated the history of science. However, years later, in response to the oppressive control of the Roman Church over people's spirituality and intelligence, Europe saw two major movements of resistance: the Reformation and the Renaissance, or the Enlightenment. Whether directly from Wittenberg to England, or via Geneva before reaching England, the seeds of the Reformation planted in Germany spread rapidly across the European continent, crossing the Channel to the British Isles. The Reformation, which sought a return to the Bible, sparked intense conflicts with the Catholic Church, and from the central countries of the Reformation emerged traditions of the rule of law and constitutional liberty. On the other hand, the Renaissance, which sought human liberation, posed no threat to the Catholic Church and eventually concluded amid Southern power struggles. The Renaissance began in Italy and later spread to Western Europe, where it also sowed the seeds of an overcorrection against the Middle Ages. And by the Enlightenment, the blind rebellion of humanism against Christian faith had begun to show its true colors. In the 17th century, there was intense hostility between French Catholics and Protestants, also known as Huguenots. While the Enlightenment represented a growth in personal freedom for many, it was a time of fluctuation, instability, and turmoil for the Huguenots. This persecution led Huguenots to flee France and seek refuge around the world, with many viewing North America as their new home. As time went on, the colonies, especially Pennsylvania, attracted the attention of French philosophers for the religious freedom they had fought for.
Have freedom of justice and be free to worship God in His own way.
In 1776, the newly established United States implemented religious tolerance and the separation of church and state, and began lobbying to support religious freedom in France. Many early Americans were descendants of the Huguenots, including George Washington and Paul Revere. Marquis de Lafayette, an important general in the American Revolutionary War, realized that many American leaders were also of Huguenot descent. This motivated him to join lobbying efforts to persuade Louis XVI to pass an edict of tolerance that would guarantee religious freedom in France. Meanwhile, in other European countries, the Huguenots were met with more sympathy and acceptance. Shortly after the Edict of Nantes was signed, large numbers of the Huguenots moved into Switzerland, Germany, England, Holland, Denmark, and the Swiss territories, making remarkable contributions to these countries. The diversity and inclusivity of the northern nations also caught the attention of philosophes in France. The famous philosopher Voltaire, who devoted all his passion to opposing Christianity, once contemptuously remarked that he would gladly trade his place in heaven for a Prussian coin. During the summer of 1765, Voltaire wrote in a letter to Claude Adrien Helvétius, an aspiring poet and disciple of the philosopher, about the growing support for Enlightenment ideals. All the North is with us. Russia, Poland, Austria, and Prussia have raised the banners of toleration and philosophy. We French are obviously not destined to be first in these matters. Truths reach us from abroad, but even if such truths come to us from outside, it is of course excellent that we should adopt them. By the early 1760s, French politicians began to publicly acknowledge that, instead of creating faithful Catholics, their policies had produced libertines, faithless men, atheists, and ultimately rebels. In 1787, the French government finally promised Huguenots basic human rights in France, though these rights were still very limited. However, by this time, Scotland had already established a strong Presbyterian tradition rooted in conservative faith and moral values. England had witnessed the Glorious Revolution a century earlier, leading to the establishment of a robust constitutional system. And in the Netherlands, modern federalism and parliamentary democracy were emerging. In contrast, in countries where the Enlightenment overshadowed the Reformation, like France, violent revolutions were born. In 1789, Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris was transformed into the Temple of Reason and was vandalized by the Paris Commune. A Parisian actress was dressed up as a Greek goddess, and people, dressed as ancient Romans, carried her into this cathedral. From that moment on, Paris was determined to abandon its Christian faith. During the French Revolution, Notre Dame suffered extensive desecration. Much of its religious imagery was damaged or destroyed. It wasn't until 1802 that Napoleon restored Notre Dame to its religious function. And it was also Napoleon who, in front of the altar, grabbed the crown from the Pope's hands and placed it on his own head, indicating the beginning of political despotism.
Long live the Emperor! Long live the Emperor!
By 1828, people of Paris asked the Parliament to tear down this cathedral and use the money to help the poor. At the same time, in one corner of the cathedral's bell tower, Victor Hugo found the Greek word fate carved in the wall. This moved him to write the masterpiece Notre Dame de Paris. During this time of great upheaval, Hugo depicted a story set in the Gothic era, and Quasimodo's cry of sanctuary seems to echo as Paris's swan song of faith in God, doubling as a plea for the preservation of the city's historic Gothic architecture, and thus its heritage.
This is the house of God!
Just as the troubadour sings, man tries to reach the stars, engraving his deeds on stained glass and stone, but the age of faith has faded into mist. In 2019, Notre Dame was caught in a fire. During this year's Olympic opening ceremony, it was still depicted as a construction site, reduced to just a famous building with no spiritual meaning at all. The artistic people whom Hugo once criticized for their wrongdoings have now become the mainstream of French culture, and there was only one brief shot of the torchbearer in the bell tower, a weak nod to this famous novel. Then the scene moved to the barricade rehearsal from Les Miserables, with the anthem, "Do You Hear the People Sing?" Despite that, Les Miserables isn't really about violent revolution for freedom, it's a story about redemption. Inspector Javert, who's loyal to the law, can only bring destruction to Jean Valjean, while Bishop Myriel, who lives by the gospel, gives him a new life. Javert realizes that human law isn't reliable, but can't reconcile grace and forgiveness, so he ultimately committed suicide. The revolution here is just a backdrop, maybe even a critique, reflecting what Hugo really wanted to say. The LGBTQ community emphasizes identity so much like a kind of salvation. Interestingly, Les Miserables is also a story of exploring one's identity. Jean Valjean was once a thief and a fugitive. After receiving God's redemption, he started to rebuild his identity. He lived under a new name, transforming into a successful businessman and mayor. But in the end, he made the tough choice to let go of the identity he had carefully built, and embrace his Christian identity, embarking on the fugitive journey again. Until he witnessed Cosette marry the one she loved, at the end of his life, he could finally say, "Lord, receive my soul. I am Jean Valjean." Whether your identity is one that society gives you, or one you create yourself, like LGBTQ, you'll always face a deeper question. Who am I? In the end, you'll have to present your answer before God. The hero Jean Valjean has a special meaning for us Christians, but the Paris Olympic opening ceremony totally missed the true essence of Les Miserables. It was just using Hugo's work to introduce the French Revolution, not to showcase as the cultural treasure it is. I believe the French were really trying to show off their cultural heritage. But for them, the revolution is the real treasure. Rooted in anti-religion and anti-tradition, and exalting reason and individualism, the Enlightenment finally grew into a human-centered movement that exploded from thought into politics. The French Revolution was the first time in Western history that society tried to radically transform itself through ideology. For the first time in Europe, people started thinking that society could be completely torn down through revolution and rebuilt according to some utopian vision. This was unimaginable in the past, but now it's a common way of thinking. Whether it's today's anarchism, feminism, environmentalism, or the LGBTQ movement, these are similar attempts to reshape society based on ideological value, which starkly contrast with Christianity, that reverence for God's providence. From the French Revolution onward, the Western world began to embrace a culture dominated by human-centered rationalism, progressivism. Then, Darwin proposed the theory of evolution, which started as a hypothesis about the natural world and gradually became accepted as a worldview explaining changes in human society. Then came Freud's modern psychology, Marx's communist ideals, and Hitler's totalitarianism followed, and modern civilization experienced 2 world wars in the 20th century, shaping the world we live in today. We finally became a secular society where the nation itself implied systemic evil. Chinese netizens often jokingly refer to France as the old revolutionary base, but with its thousands of years of repeated uprisings and violent overthrows of old dynasties, isn't China, an authoritarian state with imperial power, also an old revolutionary base? If the pursuit of freedom is an innate human instinct, then the series of bloody massacres just precisely showcase the lack of freedom in reality. Do those northern countries, which have nurtured France's spirit of tolerance, truly have less freedom than France? And compared to France, do these nations really lack a sense of aesthetics? Or is it because institutional change is so difficult, even prone to failure, that art has become the primary way for the French to express their individuality and defend their personal dignity? I first noticed the opening ceremony because the French singer who performed at the Olympics created an account on a popular Chinese social media platform and thanked his Chinese audience for their understanding and support. Many comments on his post explained the controversies to ordinary Chinese viewers. Although most of these comments were not from Christians, and some even absolves him of blasphemy, they were all deleted, leaving only praise and admiration. It seems that the singer has enjoyed himself on this clean and friendly platform where Christians are silenced due to censorship. Jesus is known as the Prince of Peace. After the Last Supper, he was arrested, stripped of his garments by the soldiers. Interestingly, the singer playing Dionysus, while performing naked in front of the mocked Last Supper, was singing a song expressing what he believes to be love and peace. Since the Enlightenment, those who have tried to enlighten us have shifted from philosophers to novelists, and now to performance artists. Yet we're apparently drifting further away from the real love and peace, and even away from the basic intelligence. So, what exactly did the Paris Olympic opening ceremony express in terms of French romance? What is it about French aesthetic that captivates so deeply, to the point where France chose to showcase it as a signature feature? French writer Milan Kundera, in his book, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, offers an explanation of the term kitsch. Kitsch is the beaming smile that people force onto their faces as they approach the grandstand during a May Day parade, expressing a required approval for communism. It's also the 2 tears shed over a child running across a grassy field. The first tear is for the child, the second tear is for being moved by the sight of the child. It is this second tear that turns the experience into kitsch. The opening ceremony was France shedding that second tear for its modern artistic legacy. The initial tear was heartfelt because, in these works about love, there was a genuine connection and resonance between persons. I enjoy walking on Montjuïc in Barcelona, where there's a large cemetery. I spent hours contemplating the beautiful sculptures there, trying to grasp the meaning the sculptor sought to express, or the emotions and will of the models. When I saw this sculpture, I was suddenly moved. It reminded me of the verse, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness." The human features on the sculpture's face, imbued with personhood by the Creator, can convey the essence of life, emotions, contemplation, will, and pursuit, even though they are not alive. When I, as another person, appreciate these sculptures endowed with personhood, I feel concerned and moved. It becomes a spiritual encounter with another being. This connection between personhoods is what makes love possible. God reveals himself as a triune being, with three persons in communion with each other. The relationship between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit is of love, and this Trinity forms the original fellowship. Therefore, God is love, and love is the source of his creating. Among all living creatures, God has granted only humans, the person, to participate in this divine love. All the figurative sculptures in the cemetery are not just imitations of the Creator's work, but also tributes to God's grace for us. This is the ultimate source of our art and aesthetics. This is why we are enchanted by Mona Lisa. Even though this enchantment for personhood has turned into lust, even though this opening ceremony was filled with blasphemed God and humiliated the Christian faith, France still made a strong effort to convey that a deep love for humanity has ingrained in its culture. It stemmed from a faith where our God gave the commandment to love others. This is something France cannot deny. It is the root of the romantic nature in their culture. The 2008 Beijing Olympics opening ceremony provides a good example here for us. Chinese culture lacked the influence of Christian faith and has never accepted the commandments to love God and love others. So we instead directed our love toward fetishism and idol worship. The Beijing opening ceremony attempted to convey a theme of harmony, yet it lacked any overlapping interaction between persons. This kind of harmony exists only in the absence of personhood. Thus, the entire performance vividly showcased love for mountains, nature, objects, tradition, totems, the collective, and the nation, but no love for the unique person, missing the aesthetic experience born from the interaction between persons. As a result, even though the Beijing Olympic opening ceremony was widely praised, it was merely a spectacular visual feast. France has never forgotten about loving others, but it has forgotten that this love originates only from God's abundant self-revelation to us. When France forgot this first tier and became self-indulgent in the second, third, and fourth tiers, its aesthetics finally turned into a form of self-centered idolatry, increasingly become detached from morality, and even takes on a religious role. People hand over their spiritual world to capricious artists. Their understanding of humanity becomes narrow, and the value of morality is belittled. It means the vision of humanity as a unity is impossible. We all know that the Olympics is a world-class event that symbolizes global peace, friendship, and unity. However, French philosopher Alain Badiou once wrote a book called St. Paul, The Foundation of Universalism, where he, as an atheist, argues that Paul is the greatest figure in the history of thought because Paul was the first to bring a universal spirit to human society. Later philosophers who discuss the universality of truth must check Paul's work. The true beginning of humanity as a collective entity in thought started with Paul. But separating Paul and his writings from the mechanisms of Christian faith is impossible. So the true beginning of humanity as a collective entity in thought comes from the gospel that Paul preached. It's not the pluralism celebrated at the Paris Olympics that truly eliminates divisions and barriers between people. It's not even the original spirit of the ancient Greek Olympics. Rather, it is the gospel that Paul preached, where we are all created equally, judged equally, and received God's salvation on the cross equally. In the rise of modern atheism, no country is more important than France. No city is more important than Paris. What each Olympic opening ceremony performance aims to convey is the dream of achieving love and peace in a world without Christ's redemption on the cross. Every 4 years, the descendants of Adam come together to listen to songs like Imagine, drawing inspiration from a false gospel, and finding the courage to continue changing the world with ideals. And this time, Paris finally aimed its spear directly at Christ, fully revealing the anti-Christian nature of this illusion. You may think that my view of history is strongly influenced by my values and it is biased. As a Christian, I cannot deny the providence and guidance of the Holy Spirit throughout history. But who can know the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor? It was only after the French Revolution that Christianity became a cult. The church finally returned to the margins of secular society and regained its evangelical nature. Christians once again became the blessed who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. The Bible never tries to explain to us the clear cause and effect relationship between God's sovereign control and every evil on earth. We simply need to trust him. If the ultimate purpose of all things working together is to glorify his name, then the fact that he allowed this blasphemous Olympic opening ceremony to happen must hide his good intentions behind it. Perhaps this is to give the French people a renewed hope and invitation to reconcile with God. Let's pray for France, asking God to guide this nation, so full of love, toward the Bible and Christian faith, and to ignite a true renaissance. That's all for this episode of Lil Prep. Making a video is not easy. If you enjoyed my content, please be sure to like and share so that this invitation can reach more people. This is Gospel Lil Prep. I am Avery, and I'll see you in the next video.